welcome to Viking Preparedness. I am Pastor Joe Fox, and this is
Sister Kate.
So, someone recently asked me a question based on the series of videos I did where I spoke about MAGs, crews, teams having to be physically proximate in the event, having to live very close to one another so that they could physically assist one another. And what that usually means is people are going to have to move. They're going to have to move from where they're living now to another location, whether that be one of the members' farms or a mutual bug out location that they all pitched together and secured, something like that. And the question was, how do we know when to go? What tripwires do we use? What indications are there that it's time for us to all gather together at that location? And so in this video, I'm gonna tap into some tactics, techniques, and procedures from my time working intelligence, and we're gonna talk about indicators, indications, and warnings. But first, I asked a question in a recent video. I posted an Ozark Geek video where he was showing these news articles about the shootings, and the date of the articles on the internet predated the incident itself, and it looked hinky. And if you recall, I did not weigh in with an opinion. I simply said, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, but I know some of y'all are. What's the deal? And in fact, many of you knew the answer. And the answer is not conspiracy. The answer is not, yeah, man, they got caught again, they're getting sloppy. Let me tell you something, they're not that sloppy. The answer is clear to me that they're stubs. And so somebody writes an article about gun violence in general or whatever, and then when a new event happens, they just add to it instead of having to recreate the wheel. It's just like if you've ever written a book or something like that, and you start writing, and then you come back and you edit it and you add and you do things like that. Heck, for the warrior level Vikings, when I do my write-ups here, if there was some way, and I'm sure there is, to forensically analyze those articles, I always type over on a Word document the last article that I wrote. I have it on my desktop of my laptop, and I just call it up and retype over it. And so really, if you look at an article that I put out 2 days ago, it could be dated 2 years ago. So that's what's going on there. No big conspiracy. So put that aside. We got enough to worry about without making up stuff to worry about. So those of you who answered, thank you. All right. How do we know when it's time to all go to the mutual location? The techniques I'm going to talk about are similar techniques that you can. How do you know when it's time to bug out? How do you know when it's time to start carrying a rifle in your car as opposed to just a pistol? How do you know when it's time to start, locking all the doors in your house? Whatever. You could just go by gut and feel and say, wow, things are getting hinky, but there's a more scientific way. And an example is during the Cold War, how did we know, and I'm sure there's similar things now, that it's time to go to DEFCON whatever, right? We need to spin up the missiles and get ready to fight and start taking action. And so there was a list of things, indicators, warnings that we would monitor. And maybe one of those is, are Soviet cities being evacuated? If so, bing, that's one. Has the Soviet leadership gone into hiding? Ding, that's two. Have all the Soviet submarines suddenly put out to sea? Ding, right? And so there was a list developed for various contingencies in which I was involved. And some of these were literally on the wall with light bulbs, incandescent. They didn't have LEDs back then. And light bulbs would be lit up, and there could be like 15 different things that we were looking at, and at any given time, 3 of them could be lit up. I mean, yeah, and I'm making this part up. I'm not going to tell you what we were looking at, and I didn't work with the Soviets, so I can make that up. But like, if the Soviet leadership all disappeared and a light bulb goes off, yeah, it could be that they're just all having a getaway at their version of Camp David, right? But it's an indicator. They're all gone for a reason. If all the subs put out to sea, that in and of itself doesn't have to set off any triggers, because maybe they're having an exercise. You have to look for patterns and things like that. And so you are going to have to develop your own indicators and warnings. And I would suggest that you come up with a list. And, your list should probably be 10 to 15 max things. And when you see, and again, you're going to have to put your own feelings into it. When you see X number of these things lit up at one time, you take these actions. And so let's just going with it here. Say you have 15 things, and if you see 4 lit up at one time, it's time to alert the crew to start packing their vehicles and getting ready to move. And if you see out of the 15, 10 of them lit up, it's time to start moving.
Like a flow chart even.
Yeah. Well, it's not really a flow chart, because a flow chart goes if this, if yes or no, do this. This is just out of so many indicators, we're going to go. And you have to be smart about your indicators. If you pick, now I'm going to try and make up some things, and I haven't thought about this ahead of time, because I don't have this set up at the moment for me. If you decide that if the president is moved to an alternate location, one, how are you going to know, right? But like in 9/11, that was reported pretty quickly that President Bush was moved to an alternate location. If you hear that if I heard a U.S. city was nuked, I'd move everybody to my location. So that's not part of the list. I probably should have thought about this before I started shooting. But, indicators. Martial law has happened. Okay, martial law happened during the LA riots. Martial law, I think, was declared during Ferguson, but I'm not sure. They may not have declared martial law in Ferguson. But, maybe you say if martial law is declared in 3 cities, that's an indicator, right? That means that, people are getting a little antsy. And if you hear that, shipping has stopped to the United States, or you hear that a pandemic flu, we did have this indicator set up for a while. We had one that if we heard, although this wasn't a list, it was one indicator, if there was one incidence of pandemic in our county, we were alerting the troops to move in. So if you wanted to make that chart, that flow chart, you start getting hinky when it's like in the neighboring state. Neighboring state has incidents of pandemic, that's an indicator. Things like that. You're just going to have to come up with your own. Sit down and discuss with each other, what is it going to take for us to come here? And the thing is, better to be a week too early than 5 seconds too late. A good friend of mine, and he's on this, Mosby's Men, he came up with the idea or the concept or the phrase that if you didn't bug out on 9/11, if you didn't gather your troops and all join up at the bug out location on 9/11, you're never gonna bug out. And he's right. If you look at what was going on 9/11, all of a sudden the towers blow up, and then the Pentagon crash into the Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden, what's next? Nobody knew what was coming next. Anything could have happened next. That was probably a pretty good time, to start moving towards your link-up location. And then, of course, maybe a day or two later, you're like, okay, we're good. Let's go back. Let's go back to our homes and normal lives. Same thing with Y2K. If you hadn't bugged out before Y2K and joined up with your people at your bug out location, if Y2K had happened, you probably wouldn't have made it. You know, if Y2K had happened in the way that people were suggesting that it would. So yeah, you're gonna have to do it. See, I can't do it for you. You're gonna have to do it yourself. What types of things are gonna make you want to be at your bug out location? And then if it's type of thing A, what types of things go back behind that? What types of things have to happen before A happens? Cities getting nuked. Well, you could hear overseas that whatever military you think's going to nuke us, they're starting to take actions. It's being reported on. They're dispersing troops and stuff. It's like, wow, it looks like they may nuke us. 3 of those light up. We better get ready for a nuke coming in. I hope that's helpful. This didn't go as smoothly as I thought it would, but I'm thinking about where I'm driving to right now, but it should get you there. Come up with a list of several indicators that perhaps taken alone, taken individually, it's something, big deal. Stock market just dropped, 2,000 points. It'll come back up. Okay, but in conjunction with that, there's pig flu, or chicken flu, or in conjunction with that, also there's this and this. All of a sudden, things start adding up, and you go, this doesn't look right. It's easier to notice those things lighting up like that, literally or figuratively, if you already have the list made, as opposed to looking back on it 3 weeks later and going, dang, we should have noticed that. We should have realized with all these things happening at the same time, we should have moved together. I hope that's helpful. I'm interested in your comments. Y'all take care, be safe, keep your nose to the wind, and I will see you out there.